The rain fell on the cobblestones not as a gentle drizzle, but as a hard, slanting downpour that turned the ancient European city into a canvas of reflected neon and deep, impenetrable shadows. It was in one such shadow, a narrow alleyway choked with the scent of wet brick and overflowing refuse, that Captain Eva Rostova finally ran out of road. Her breath came in ragged, controlled gasps, a fine mist in the chill air. The tactical bootsteps behind her were methodical, unhurried. They knew they had her cornered. She pressed her back against the cold, damp wall, the rough texture scraping through her thin jacket. Her heart was a frantic, trapped bird beating against her ribs, but her hands were steady. Years of training, of mental conditioning, fought back against the primal fear. She was a gray fox, a deep-cover operative for Army intelligence, and her cover was utterly catastrophically blown. The men hunting her were not police. They were professionals, private military contractors hired by a man who could not afford to let her live. Alistair Croft. The name was a curse in her mind. A rogue CIA officer, a traitor, and the architect of this entire bloody evening. She risked a glance around the corner. Two figures, silhouetted against the distant street lamp at the alley's mouth, advanced with weapons raised. Their communication was a series of short guttural bursts in a language she understood all too well. They were flanking her. There was no exit at the other end of the alley, just a solid wall of mortared stone, 3 meters high. A classic kill box. Her mind raced, calculating angles, distances, and the single desperate option she had left. In the cargo pocket of her dark trousers was her only weapon, not a firearm, but a tool of misdirection, a U.S. Army M18 smoke grenade. Its cylinder was cold and reassuringly solid in her grip. This was not how her father, the old Cold War general, had described warfare. He spoke of front lines and honorable engagements. This was a knife fight in the dark. The lead contractor was closer now, maybe 20 yards away. She could see the glint of rain on the barrel of his rifle. He shouted a command for her to surrender, to show herself. Eva closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, not in prayer, but in focus. She saw her controller, Major David Miller's concerned face during their last secure video call. She saw the data on the stolen drone guidance system she had transmitted, the evidence that could end Croft. She had done her duty. Now she had to survive it. With a fluid, practiced motion born of 1,000 drills, she pulled the pin. The spoon flew off with a faint metallic ping that was lost in the rain. She didn't throw it far, just a few feet in front of her, into the center of the alley. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sharp hiss, a thick, billowing cloud of white smoke began to pour forth, voracious and fast. It swallowed the dim light, engulfing the dumpsters, the puddles, and her own position in an opaque, choking veil. The contractors opened fire, a staccato roar of automatic weapons that shattered the night. Bullets sparked and ricocheted off the stone walls, chewing into the brick where she had been standing just seconds before. But she was already moving, not towards the exit, but deeper into the smoke, towards the dead-end wall. The cloud was her sanctuary, her cloak. She knew these alleys, had walked them for 18 months. She knew the footholds, the gaps, the forgotten routes. The gunfire ceased, replaced by confused shouts. They were blind. She was not. Reaching the wall, her fingers found the familiar crevices between the stones. She climbed, not with the grace of a rock climber, but with the brutal, efficient desperation of a soldier fighting for her life. The smoke clung to her, a ghostly shroud, as she hauled herself over the top and dropped silently into the adjacent alley. Back in the kill box, the white smoke began to thin, wisping away in the rain. The two contractors advanced cautiously, weapons scanning, their laser sights cutting red lines through the haze. They reached the wall at the end. It was empty. There was no body, no blood, no sign of her at all. It was as if the woman had simply ceased to exist. One of the men keyed his radio, his voice tight with a mixture of fury and disbelief. The target, she's gone. On the other end of that radio, in a plush, secure office, Alistair Croft felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. The stories were true. She was the ghost they couldn't catch. The ghost had a name once. It was Eva Rostova. Long before the smoke grenades and the narrow escapes, She was a girl in a sun-drenched American house, polishing her father's medals. The brass and enamel felt heavy and important in her small hands. General John Rostava was a giant of a man, his posture still ramrod straight even in his favorite worn armchair. His war was a map on the wall, with clear lines and defined enemies. He spoke of honor, of facing an opponent you could see across the Iron Curtain. "War has rules, Ava," he'd say, his voice a low rumble. "It's a terrible thing, but it has a certain order." She would listen, mesmerized, believing his world was the only one that existed. That certainty shattered on a bright September morning when she was a teenager. She watched the television screen over and over as the towers fell. The enemy her father described had no flag, no uniform. This new war was a phantom, a shadow that demanded a different kind of soldier. She didn't tell her father her true reasons for enlisting. He saw it as a daughter following in his footsteps, a tradition of service. He beamed with pride at her commission. He never knew the deep, quiet fear her mother carried, a fear that now lived in Eva's own heart. The Army quickly recognized a unique mind. Ava had an ear for languages, a gift that went beyond fluency. She could hear the subtle hesitation in a phrase, the regional dialect hidden beneath formal speech, the unspoken meaning lurking between the words. She became a linguist, her talents funneled into the intelligence corps. For a while, it was enough. She worked in secure facilities, translating intercepted communications, a cog in a vast secret machine. The change came during a joint task force operation in Afghanistan. A high-value target was located, but the local intelligence was a tangled web of dialects and coded phrases. Ava was on the headset, listening to the raw, chaotic feed from a surveillance team. The official translator was struggling, but Ava, she heard it. A specific colloquial term for a trap, used only in one remote valley. She broke protocol, speaking directly over the command channel. "Abort! It's an ambush! The house is rigged." The team leader, a hardened Delta operator, hesitated for a critical second before ordering a withdrawal. Moments later, the compound erupted in a massive explosion. They had been minutes from walking into a death trap. That operator was Major David Miller. He sought her out afterwards. He didn't thank her. He studied her. "How did you know?" he asked, his eyes missing nothing. She explained the word, its origin, its specific deadly connotation. He just nodded. A week later, the offer came. It wasn't an order, not exactly. It was an invitation to a meeting in a nondescript office in Northern Virginia. There, two men in civilian clothes laid it out for her. The war was no longer just in the mountains of Afghanistan. It was in the financial districts of Europe, the ports of North Africa, the back alleys of cities America wasn't officially at war with. They needed people who could disappear, who could listen, who could become someone else. They called it the Gray Fox Program. She thought of her father's maps, his clear lines. This new battlefield had none. It was a wilderness of mirrors. And she realized with a cold, clear certainty that this was the real front line now. She said yes. The transformation was meticulous, total. Ava Rostova, the promising Army officer, was given a new, unremarkable file. She became Dr. Eva Roston, a quiet academic specializing in European economic policy. Her training was brutal, a psychological stripping down and rebuilding. They taught her how to spot surveillance, how to build a legend, how to kill with her hands, and most importantly, how to be alone. The last time she saw her parents, she hugged her father tightly. He smelled of cigar smoke and aftershave. "Make me proud, Captain," he whispered. She felt the weight of the lie like a physical burden. She was already gone. The city was a beautiful, ancient cage. For 18 months, Dr. Ava Roston lived a life of quiet routine. She rented a small apartment with a view of terracotta rooftops, taught a few seminars at the university, and spent her evenings in cafes, a book always in hand. She was a ghost, but a comfortable one, her existence a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction. Her only tether to her old life was Major David Miller, her controller. Their contact was sparse, conducted through encrypted channels on a laptop that was itself a ghost in the machine. His face on the screen was a familiar anchor in her sea of lies. "How is the weather, Scholar?" he would ask, his voice calm, but his eyes always searching hers for cracks. Her mission was simple. Deceptively so. Observe. infiltrate the periphery of a network of arms dealers and corrupt officials who used the city's old money and older banks to finance chaos. She was to be their ears, a passive listener. She attended dull gallery openings and academic cocktail parties, her recorder hidden in a simple pen, her mind a steel trap for names, connections, and financial jargon. It was at one such event, a fundraiser for a new symphony hall, that she first saw him. Alistair Croft. He was a handsome man, with silvering hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He moved through the room with an easy, proprietary air, a man who belonged everywhere and nowhere. He was introduced as a security consultant with international interests. Her instincts, the ones Miller's people had honed to a razor's edge, screamed a silent alarm. Croft was too smooth, too connected. She began to focus her entire operation on him. It was slow, patient work. She tracked his movements, noted his associates, and slowly pieced together a puzzle that made her blood run cold. He wasn't just a facilitator. He was a principal. A rogue CIA officer, using his knowledge and contacts to sell America's secrets to the highest bidder. The proof came in fragments. A whispered conversation in a garden about delivery schedules for aviation components. Financial trail she painstakingly followed, through shell companies that led back to a hostile intelligence service. Then, the crown jewel. She managed to access a data dump from a careless associate of his. There, nestled among mundane files, were the complete schematics for the Falcon's Eye, a next-generation drone guidance system that was supposed to be impenetrable. She prepared her transmission with meticulous care, her fingers flying across the keyboard in the silence of her apartment. This was it. This was the reason for all the loneliness, all the deception. She bundled the audio files, the financial records, and the devastating schematics into a single, encrypted package. She typed her summary for Miller, her words clinical and precise. She described Croft's network, his treachery, and the catastrophic potential of the stolen technology. With a deep breath, she hit the transmit key. A progress bar filled on the screen, and the data vanished into the ether on its way to the Pentagon. A wave of relief washed over her. The hardest part was over, but the relief was short-lived. It was replaced by a sudden primal feeling of being watched. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. She glanced out her window, down at the quiet street below. A black sedan she didn't recognize was parked across the street, its engine off but with two figures sitting inside. It could be nothing, a coincidence. But in her world, there were no coincidences. The trap had been sprung the moment she sent that data. Croft had people inside the system, and they had been waiting. They had flagged the transmission, traced it back to her location. The hunter had become the hunted. The ghost was about to be flushed from the shadows. The silence in her apartment was suddenly deafening, a heavy blanket smothering the ordinary nighttime sounds of the city. Ava didn't move from her desk. She kept her breathing slow and even, her eyes fixed on the black sedan below. One of the figures inside lifted a hand, speaking into a radio. They were professionals. They weren't here to ask questions. They were here to clean up a mess, and she was the mess. Her mind clicked into a cold, analytical gear. The front door was a death trap. The fire escape was an obvious route they would have covered. Her gaze swept the room, landing on a small vent near the floor, an old heating duct. It was a long shot, a desperate move, but it was the only one they wouldn't expect. She moved with a speed that was silent and efficient. In 60 seconds, she had changed from her casual clothes into dark, durable trousers and a black sweater. She shoved the laptop's hard drive into her pocket and wiped down every surface she could remember touching. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the stairwell, moving fast. They weren't bothering with stealth anymore. They knew she was inside. With a final glance around the life she was leaving forever, Ava pried the cover off the vent and slid into the darkness feet first, pulling the grill back into place just as the front door splintered open with a violent crash. The duct was a tight, dusty coffin. She crawled, her elbows and knees scraping against the cold metal, the sound horribly loud in the confined space. She could hear muffled shouts and the crash of furniture from her apartment above. They were tearing it apart. She emerged into a maintenance closet in the building's basement, her heart hammering against her ribs. She slipped out into a dank corridor and found a side exit that opened onto a narrow service lane. The cold night air hit her face like a slap. She was out, but she was far from safe. She moved quickly, blending into the shadows, her senses hyper-aware. She could feel their presence, a predatory pressure at the edges of her perception. She used the city as her ally, darting through a crowded late-night market, doubling back through a department store, and emerging from a different exit. For a few precious minutes, she thought she might have lost them. Then she saw him, a tall man in a dark jacket, his eyes scanning the crowd with a hunter's focus. He hadn't seen her yet. She ducked into a narrow alley, hoping it was a throughway. It wasn't. It was a dead end, a classic kill box of brick and mortar, just like in the training scenarios she had run 100 times. The only difference was the smell of wet garbage and the very real, very final consequence of failure. She heard their bootsteps again, this time from the alley's entrance. There were two of them now, blocking her only way out. Their silhouettes were dark and menacing against the distant glow of the city. One of them spoke, his voice calm and flat. "There's nowhere to go. Come out quietly." It was a lie, and they all knew it. Coming out quietly meant a bullet in the back of the head and a body that would never be found. Eva pressed herself against the cold, wet brick, her mind racing through her dwindling options. Her hand went to the cargo pocket of her trousers, her fingers closing around the cold, cylindrical form of the M18 smoke grenade. This was it. This was the end of the line for Dr. Eva Roston. The ghost had to perform her final trick. She pulled the pin, the metallic ping, a tiny sound of defiance in the tense silence. She rolled the grenade into the center of the alley. The hiss was like a serpent's warning. The white smoke billowed out with shocking speed, a solid wall of opaque vapor that swallowed the light, the dumpsters, and her own slender form. The gunfire erupted instantly, a deafening roar that filled the alley. Bullets sparked and whined as they ricocheted off the stone around her. But she was already moving, not towards the shooters, but deeper into the blinding, beautiful cloud. The world dissolved into a swirling, blinding whiteness. The smoke was a physical presence, thick and chalky in her throat, stinging her eyes. It was also her salvation. Inside the cloud, she was no one. She was a phantom, a wisp of consciousness moving on pure instinct. The gunfire was deafening, a storm of lead that chewed into the brickwork where she had been standing just heartbeats before. They were firing blind, hoping for a lucky hit. Eva didn't run for the alley's mouth. That was what they expected. Instead, she dropped low, her body coiled, and moved parallel to the wall, her fingertips brushing the rough, wet stone to maintain her orientation. The shouts of the contractors were confused, angry. They were blind, but she knew this alley. She had memorized its every crack and fissure during her long, lonely walks. Her objective wasn't escape through the entrance they guarded, but the seemingly insurmountable wall at the dead end. Through the thinning smoke, she saw its dark shape loom. It was 3 meters of sheer, wet stone. Impossible. But she had scouted this too. A forgotten drainpipe, rusted but sturdy, ran up one side. A series of small, uneven gaps between the bricks provided just enough purchase for her desperate fingers and the rubber soles of her boots. The climb was a brutal, silent agony of straining muscles and scraping skin. A bullet snapped past her head, close enough to hear its supersonic crack. They had seen her movement, a shadow in the dissipating cloud. She hauled herself over the top, rolling onto the narrow, gravel-covered roof of a connected building. She didn't pause to look back. She was over and moving, a silhouette against the city's glow for only a second before vanishing into the deeper darkness on the other side. She dropped into a different, empty alley, her landing soft and silent. The sound of confused shouting and frantic radio traffic from the other side of the wall was already fading behind her. She had vanished. Half a mile away, in a cramped, secure room at the U.S. Embassy, Major David Miller watched a satellite feed go dark. The thermal signature that was Eva Rostova had flared bright with exertion during the climb, and then abruptly vanished into the cold mass of the city. He slammed his fist on the console. "She's out. She's alive." The junior analyst beside him shook his head. "Sir, the asset's cover is completely compromised. The operational parameters dictate we—" Miller cut him off with a sharp gesture. "The operational parameters just changed." He stormed out of the room, heading for the office of the CIA station chief. The meeting was a study in cold pragmatism. The station chief, a man named Peterson, with the weary eyes of a lifelong bureaucrat, listened impassively. "Major, I understand your personal investment, but Captain Rostova is a burned asset. Her identity is known to a hostile element. Any attempt to exfiltrate her now risks a major diplomatic incident. Our hands are tied." Miller leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "With all due respect, sir, that burned asset has the only copy of the Falcon's Eye schematics and the financial trail that leads directly to a rogue CIA officer. Croft doesn't just want her dead. He needs that data back. She's not just hiding. She's protecting the most vital intelligence we have on this entire operation. We don't abandon our people, and we sure as hell don't abandon the mission." Peterson sighed, steepling his fingers. "What exactly are you proposing, Major?" Meanwhile, Eva moved through the city's underbelly. She was a rat in the walls, using steam vents from the subway, maintenance tunnels, and the locked basements of old buildings. She found refuge in the one place no one would look for a spy on the run, the dusty, silent storage room of a public library, accessed through a loose grate in an alley. In the absolute darkness, surrounded by the smell of old paper, she allowed herself a single shuddering breath. The fear she had kept locked down now threatened to overwhelm her. She thought of her father, of his clear lines and honorable battles. Her war was this: alone, hunted, and buried alive in the heart of a city that no longer felt like a cage, but a grave. She was the ghost they couldn't catch, but she was running out of places to hide. The darkness in the library storage room was absolute, a thick velvety black that pressed in on her from all sides. Eva sat with her back against a crate of old encyclopedias, the musty smell of decaying paper filling her nostrils. This was her reality now. A ghost haunting the forgotten spaces of a city that had once been her cover, now her prison. The initial heart-pounding terror of the chase had subsided, replaced by a cold, grinding dread. How long could she last? A week? A month? They would eventually find her. Croft had the resources of a private army and, she suspected, compromised elements within the intelligence community. She was one person, alone. Her hand went to the hard drive in her pocket. It felt like a lead weight, a cursed object that had cost her everything. This data was her death sentence, but it was also her only leverage. It was the proof of Croft's treason, the evidence that could burn his entire operation to the ground. As long as she had it, he would never stop hunting her. But what if she used it? Not as a shield, but as a sword. What if she forced the confrontation on her terms? The idea was audacious, a Hail Mary pass born of sheer desperation, but it was the only move left on the board. Croft was a creature of habit and arrogance. He followed a pattern. Her intelligence on him indicated he personally oversaw the most critical exchanges, a control freak who trusted no one. He would want to be there to see her captured, to retrieve the data himself. She could use that arrogance against him. She needed to get a message to Miller. It was the riskiest part of the plan. If his communications were being monitored by Croft's people, it would be over before it began. But she had one option left, a protocol so sensitive it was only to be used for the most catastrophic of compromises, a dead drop. There was a specific park bench in a quiet, affluent neighborhood, its location chosen for its clear sight lines and ease of escape. The signal was simple, a specific brand of gum wrapper, torn in a specific way, tucked into a crack in the wood. Waiting for nightfall was an agony of tension. Every sound from the street outside the library was a potential threat. When the city finally grew quiet, she slipped out through the grate, moving like a wisp of shadow through the empty streets. The park was deserted, the bench illuminated by a single pale street lamp. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the wrapper, the tiny piece of foil feeling like a beacon that would call down hell itself. She vanished back into the darkness, her heart pounding. 24 hours later, from the rooftop of a building overlooking the park, she watched through a small pair of binoculars. Her breath caught in her throat as a figure approached the bench. It was a woman walking a dog. The woman sat down seemingly to rest. Her hand casually brushed the arm of the bench, and the gum wrapper disappeared. It was one of Miller's people. The message was received. Now came the hardest part, the waiting. She retreated to a new hiding place, a vacant apartment she accessed through a fire escape. The silence was deafening. Doubts crept in. Was this insanity? Was she walking directly into a trap of her own making? She thought of Miller, of the determined set of his jaw. She had to trust him. She had to believe that he would move heaven and earth to back her play. She spent the hours going over the plan, visualizing every step, every possible deviation. The Hauptbahnhof, the central train station. A cavernous space of glass and steel, filled with thousands of people. It was the perfect stage for a ghost to become visible one last time. She would be the bait, and she would pray that Miller and his team were the hook. The Hauptbahnhof was a cathedral of sound and light. The vast, glass-domed hall echoed with the footsteps of thousands, the rumble of arriving and departing trains, and the cacophony of a dozen different languages. Ava stood near the central information board, a fixed point in the swirling river of humanity. She felt terrifyingly exposed. Every nerve ending was on fire, her senses stretched to their absolute limit. She wore a simple beige trench coat, her hair tucked under a wide-brimmed hat, an attempt at a disguise that felt laughably thin. She was a lighthouse on a dark shore, and she knew the sharks were circling. She didn't have to wait long. She spotted the first one within 5 minutes. A man in a dark blue windbreaker pretending to read a timetable, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd. Then another, a woman with a large shopping bag positioned near the main entrance. They were Croft's people. They were good, their movements fluid and professional, but she knew what to look for. The slight bulge of a weapon under a jacket, the unnatural stillness amidst the flow of the crowd. They were closing the net, slowly, systematically. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum counting down the seconds. Where was Miller? Had her message been intercepted? Was this all for nothing? The man in the windbreaker began to move toward her, his hand drifting inside his jacket. This was it. The moment of truth, or the moment of her death. She held her ground, her posture rigid. She would not run. Not this time. Just as the man was about to close the final 10 yards, the entire atmosphere of the station shifted. It was a subtle change, a ripple in the current. From the periphery, a different kind of movement began. Men and women in casual civilian clothes, but moving with a coordinated, predatory grace that was unmistakable. They converged from the ticket lines, from the coffee shops, from the newsstands. They were Miller's people, U.S. Army Rangers and agency paramilitaries. They didn't shout or brandish weapons. They simply moved in, isolating Croft's teams with brutal, silent efficiency. The station erupted into controlled chaos. The man in the windbreaker was taken down by 2 men who moved like lightning, his weapon secured before it could be drawn. The woman with the shopping bag was pinned against a pillar, her arms twisted behind her back. Shouts of surprise and alarm rose from the civilians, but the team worked with a precision that minimized the panic. They were surgical strikes in a public space, and then she saw him, Alistair Croft. He had been watching from the upper-level balcony, a smirk of triumph on his face that had now melted into stunned disbelief. He saw his entire operation being dismantled below him. His eyes, wide with panic, scanned the crowd and locked with hers. For a single frozen moment, the ghost and the hunter saw each other clearly across the vast concourse. There was no smoke, no shadows, no lies between them. Just the raw, undeniable truth of her victory and his ruin. The ghost had not only been caught, she had chosen to be seen. He turned to flee, but 2 more of Miller's men materialized from the stairwell, blocking his escape. The look of utter defeat on his face was more satisfying than any medal could ever be. The aftermath was a quiet, antiseptic affair, a world away from the chaotic symphony of the train station. Ava was escorted to a secure, windowless room in the embassy's basement. The air smelled of floor wax and filtered circulation. She sat alone at a simple metal table, the adrenaline slowly leaching from her system, leaving her feeling hollow and impossibly tired. The trench coat was gone, replaced by a standard-issue military sweatsuit. She was back in the machine, but she no longer knew where she fit. The door opened, and Major David Miller entered. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper than she remembered. He didn't speak at first. He simply placed a small black velvet box on the table between them. Then he did something she had never seen him do before. He smiled, a genuine relieved expression that softened his entire face. "It's not the Distinguished Service Cross," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "but it carries the same weight, from the right people." Eva opened the box. Inside, nestled against the velvet, was a medal she had only ever seen in classified files. The Distinguished Intelligence Cross, the highest award for valor in the intelligence community. There was no ribbon to wear in public, no ceremony to attend. Its existence was a secret, its meaning known only to a handful of people. It was a hero's recognition for a ghost. "A 2-star from DIA is flying in tonight," Miller continued, his voice dropping. "He'll give you the official thanks. But from me, thank you, Eva. You saved more than just an asset. You saved our integrity." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Croft is in a black site singing like a canary. The Falcon's eye is secure. The mission is a success. A messy, complicated, brilliant success." Eva looked from the medal to Miller's face. The weight of it all, the fear, the loneliness, the 18 months of lies, felt immense. "And what happens now?" she asked, her own voice a whisper. "Do I go home?" Miller's smile faded, replaced by his familiar professional mask. "Captain Rostova's service record is being sealed, permanently. As far as the world is concerned." She finished her tour and honorably separated from the Army. "Dr. Eva Roston is, of course, deceased." He leaned forward slightly. "But the Gray Fox program remains. The work continues. There are other shadows, other threats that need someone who can operate in the silence." He wasn't ordering her. He was offering her a choice. A return to the sunlit world of her father, to a life of normalcy, or a return to the darkness. She thought of the alley, the smoke, the cold certainty of being hunted. Then she thought of the quiet triumph of that moment in the station, of looking into Croft's eyes and knowing she had made a difference in a war no one would ever see. She closed the lid of the velvet box and pushed it gently back across the table toward him. "I'm not sure I remember how to be in the light, David," she said softly. Miller nodded, a look of understanding passing between them. He pocketed the box. An hour later, after a debriefing that would never be written down, Eva walked out of the embassy through a service entrance. The morning sun was bright, warming the cobblestones. For a moment, she just stood there, a solitary figure feeling the unfamiliar heat on her skin. Then she turned and walked down the street, not as Eva Rostova and not as Dr. Roston, but as someone new. She didn't look back. There was no home to return to, only the next mission, the next identity, the next shadow that needed a guardian. She was already fading, becoming a new specter for a new threat. Forever the ghost they couldn't catch.